Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and let's talk about the most exciting video I've ever had on this channel. Profit and loss statements, balance sheets, and how companies actually make money. This video was inspired by a while ago. I've had these notes for a while. I've been cleaning them up. I've been iterating upon them. But effectively, there's always these conversations, often on Kickstarter, but anywhere really, about the nature of costs. How much a product costs versus how much we as the consumer pay for that product. That's going to apply to any standard board game. It's going to apply to your PS5. It's going to apply to those extra 5 miniatures you just bought, or that one singular promo card that costs the company like 2.5 cents to make and yet is going to run you like $5-6. I actually don't know how much this costs. I'm just making up a number, but you get the idea. These conversations always come up around board games in general when you're talking about the margin that a consumer has, the margins that a company has, what they can sustain, and what they actually need to do, and how much a thing costs, and how much they're charging you for that thing, and how it's all unfair and everyone's trying to rip you off. To be fair, when I say these conversations come up, I don't mean that everyone thinks that, I don't mean that everyone says that, I mean the conversations always come up. In general, I would say that this entire video is going to be nothing new to many of you. It's going to be something new to many of you, but not something that's that surprising, and also not something that ever really bothered you or you thought about. To some small percentage of you, you will understand exactly where this is all coming from. To some small percentage of you, you will be upset with companies, and this video might help. And to some smaller percentage of you, you run businesses, but you've done it well, and you think other companies are doing a terrible job. There's all these different caveats as to where any individual watching this video will fall. And so what I would say is take what you want out of this video. If it's just something you throw up in the background on the ride to work, there's no visuals, you can literally treat this like a podcast, then by all means. If it's something you don't want to listen further because you came here for board game coverage, and this, while it's about board games tangentially, is really about any business for that matter, maybe it's for you, maybe it's not for you. You can decide what you want to take out of the video. The conversation here is around profit and loss, how companies make money, the expenses you see, the expenses you don't see, and a general conversation around businesses and how they're not always ripping you off, even when you think that they might be, and even when that $12 product costs them 3.5 cents to make. 3.5 cents is probably pushing it, but the general idea stands. A company makes money through, well, selling stuff as a general basis. They sell something, either products or services. We are going to somewhat keep this more board game focused. So in this case, products. Companies sell, board game companies make money through selling products. That's going to be the board game on the table. That's going to be the promo you have. It might be the digital thing that you buy, but for the sake of this conversation, we're focusing less on the digital. It still will apply, honestly, though, because the same conversation applies. That digital product that you just bought, that Everdell digital that you just acquired is free for them. Costs them nothing to make it. Zero. Zip. Zippity-doo-dah. And yet you're paying 20 bucks for it, or whatever it currently costs. I don't know how much it costs. It might be $12. I don't know. But yeah, you're paying for that. And so these conversations apply equally to that as well, I guess. But companies make money by selling stuff. That's how they get money. And then the next conversation from that is, that's great, but what are their expenses around that product? And this is where we have a conversation around the nature of cost of goods versus expenses. This is something you'll find on a P&L statement, a profit and loss statement, which is an essential component that any business has to determine if they're actually making money or not, because that is a huge thing as far as companies making money. Companies should make money. If they don't make money, they go out of business. We no longer have company gone, board games company make all gone, and we no longer have another company in the space. Now, it's not my problem to keep a company alive, but it is my problem to not ask a company to operate in a way that is not sustainable. That is my problem, because if I do that, then I can also no longer complain when company is no longer sustainable and 4 Kickstarter campaigns don't show up at my door. So it's kind of one or the other. I either want companies to be sustainable or I don't. I will engage in buying the products I want, and I will hopefully not ask them to do things that aren't workable. But cost of goods versus expenses are the two big things. If your profit, the amount of money, not profit, if your income, if your sales, if your income, if your revenue is higher than your cost of goods and expenses, you as a company are probably making money, with giant caveats in place that we'll get to. Giant caveats. But as a general baseline, in a general business, if your revenue exceeds your cost of goods and your expenses, you are probably doing fine, as long as the cost of goods and expenses match up to the revenue coming in, which is where you get complicated with Kickstarters. For the sake of this conversation, we'll push the Kickstarter thing towards the end of the conversation. Right now, we'll just focus on general cost of goods and expenses. Cost of goods is what it sounds like. It's the cost of the goods. The cost of goods of a product of digital Everdell is 0. Now, I say that without actually knowing if that's true. My assumption is that it's 0. Maybe it's not 0. Maybe there are other factors at play. Maybe there are things that actually go into the cost of that good that I'm not aware of. I've never sold a digital product, so I'm not certain. But let's ignore the digital product and come back to the promo card. The cost of goods of the promo card involve all the costs that it takes to take this from zero and make this into a thing. How much it costs the company to make said thing, which is likely a very small amount. It's not no amount. There's the little cost of goods, there's likely the handling, there's the packaging, there's different things that go directly into this individual entity existing. Now the conversation gets even more complicated because of the way expenses are handled within a company, that some expenses that are relate to this existing might be covered under categories that are just called expenses instead of cost of goods. So for example, if you have a sole employee making a sole product, that sole employee's entire salary could theoretically be divided onto all the products that that sole employee made, but usually that sole employee's salaries will still be counted under expenses instead of cost of goods. That will hopefully make more sense in a minute. The general idea of cost of goods is the cost of the actual materials plus potentially the things that a company decided directly correlates to that item existing and nothing else. And that's usually not the bulk of the expenses. Usually. Depends on how big the company is. The larger the company is, the more efficient it is, the larger you have manufacturing lines full of products, the more the ratio will fall to the cost of goods, to how much it costs to make the product. But usually there's other expenses. The other expenses are significant. Significant. No matter what company you are, the only time, I shouldn't say the only time, I would say in general, when cost of goods exceeds expenses is because the companies are larger and larger and larger. The larger they get, the more the expenses are across the board, the more the cost of goods will exceed expenses. Although it definitely varies, don't take that too much of a statement. The point is still the same. Expenses involve everything else. Everything else we didn't just talk about. It involves the salaries of all the employees that are involved at any different level, from the CEO to the marketing to the people packaging your products, to the people picking your products, to the people dealing with individual sales, to the people who are commenting on the Kickstarter campaigns as they deal with your questions, to the people managing your social network as they post, they like, hey, this game's coming out and whatnot, and then people comment and you want someone responding and engaging and dealing with all that. Salaries are going to be a huge part of the expenses of any single company, and those expenses have to in some way be matched up with the revenue. You have the one-time production costs. Those don't go under cost of goods. The art, I'm going to keep putting this down and picking this up. The art behind this promo, that's going to be a one-time cost. Whoever commissioned the art, whoever took care of all of that, that's a one-time cost. If you're dealing with miniatures, that initial mold, that sculpt that exists for that first time, that's a one-time cost. That goes all under expenses. The rent or mortgage of the buildings you run out of in any way, shape, and form, your manufacturing, your warehousing, the employees' offices, the technology involved, the computers, the laptops, the software, all the digital, all the software and hardware that are involved in the company, those are all costs that go under expenses. Conventions, anyone going to a convention, selling your product, marketing in general, marketing is a whole category, advertising is a whole category, those Google ads, those Facebook leads, whatever Facebook post you posted, that content creator is doing a playthrough of your game, these are all expenses that a company incurs. There are a ton of expenses along the way, many of which I have not even come close to covering because the expense category is usually huge as far as the expenses a company incurs in order to make sure that they as a company can function and get you that product. And people tend to ignore those. They tend to look at it as, well, that pack of 12 miniatures that Command just sold, that cost them $1.12 to make, why are they charging me $18 for it? And the answer is cost of goods and expenses. They expect to make money on products. And the ratio of what money they make products on, the ratio of where they make money is going to be different. There is the concept of a low margin versus a high margin product. Very often low margin product, or even loss leaders. When you walk into a grocery store and they're like, hey, those, I don't know, cases of Coke over there are on sale down to $8 a case right now. In many cases, that's even a loss leader designed to get you in the door, designed to have something that they lose money on every case sold, but hopefully you grab a case of water and some chips because you want some chips with your Coke, why not? You buy some other products along the way because that's what we do, and so it becomes an expense that they incur a cost to lose money. In the case of a Command Kickstarter, I have no idea how much money they make on a core pledge. When they sell that core pledge with this chock full of extras, I assume they make money. I assume it's not a loss leader, but I assume the margins are significantly lower compared to the margins on expansions. Some of that margin difference is going to come with the fact that more people buy the core set than the expansions. And so as a company, you can make a decision around the fact that, hey, those one-time costs that relate to Marvel Zombies box set, those one-time costs that exist, we can sit there and say that we'll absorb those across our expected sales of 2 million units, and therefore the cost we need to add in is significantly lower, but fewer people are buying those expansions, especially the Kickstarter exclusive expansions. Maybe you only have 12,000 people buying that, maybe you have 2,000 people buying that expansion, and so the sculpts, the molds, the art, the playtesting, all the other aspects along the way, those one-time costs and expenses have to be extrapolated along that expansion in order to make sure that we're not losing money by offering it. It's the weird balance of many expenses actually kind of wrap into cost of goods, but in a weird way where it's not always as easily translatable, and so they go under expenses, but the decisions around pricing, the decisions around a company's of how they manage everything still has to be applied. That $12 they paid to make those 12 miniatures, and the $18 they're charging you, yes, there's profit in there, absolutely, but that profit goes to the general idea that the amount of expenses a company has are over here. The cost of goods are here. The cost, let's just use random numbers. Cost of goods here, the revenue you have is over here. You might say, well, you can charge less, just charge a drop more than the cost of goods, but if they do that, they may have to sell 100,000 units of any given product in order to actually cover their expenses. Whenever you as a company are setting a price point, the price point you are effectively setting for a product before we even get towards making money, that general price point has to equal the idea that you know you have to sell X amount of units in order for the profit on an individual product to be equal to the expenses across the company as a whole. If this is getting to be too much to you, understand that this is the stuff that a company has to deal with every single day. If you're not following this conversation, then understand that you're already out of the loop as far as the decision space, as far as what a company should or shouldn't charge for a product. There are a ton of decisions that a company has to make at any given point, and the guessing game of how much they're actually going to sell is a huge part of that. And it's a huge part of it that gets very complicated very quickly. Let's use a practical use case. If your cost of goods on a product, if it costs you $20 to make game X, and you sell game X for $40, well, your profit on game X is $20 per game, right? Well, what if you lower the price? What if you lower the price to, I don't know, $34? Okay, so you lower the price to, let's make it even lower. Let's say you lower the price from $40 down to $29. Okay, so now you're only making $9 per game, but your sales double. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Did a good thing or a bad thing just happen as far as your product line? This is fairly easy math. I'll repeat it back. Okay, we're going to go over this again. This is just a general decision space that companies have to wrestle with on a daily basis. Cost of goods of product is $20. That's how much it costs to make that product. If they sell it for $40, they'll sell 100,000 units. If they sell it for $29, they'll sell 200,000 units. Which one is better? Lowering the price point by $9, lowering the price point by $11 to a $9 profit instead of a $20 profit, but doubling the sales. Which one makes them more money? The short answer is the $40 one. Because if you're making $20 times 100,000 units, that's $200,000. If you're making $9 times 200,000 units, that's $180,000. Well, I think I lost a zero somewhere along the way, but the point's the same. You're making less money. If you are selling twice as many units, but you're making less than half the amount of profit, then you're making less money. Now, that conversation is still not over, though, because now as a company you have to decide, but having 200,000 units sold in circulation might result in a longer-lasting future for the company, for the product line, for the other things. So the decision space is not over. That's not my point. My point is that there's complexities, intense complexities around the pricing of a product and what makes the most sense to ensure you are not losing money. And who said you're selling 200,000 units, by the way? That's another factor. This is all hypothetical in which you know the answers up front, but most of the time you don't know the answers up front. Most of the time, the lowering of a price point is a guessing game as to how much that will or won't benefit you as a company, how much you're hurting yourself versus helping yourself as you try to make the decisions that are best for yourself, for the people that work for you, for the people in the gaming space who want this company to exist. And there's so many of these conversations. We haven't gotten to the fact, by the way, that profit is not a bad word. Profit is not a bad word in the slightest. The idea that in some way, shape, and form there's a conversation in which a company actually makes money, that's a good thing. Do you know what the risk and reward of a company is? The risk and reward of starting a company? It's not up to me to sit here and say, hey, by the way, you should make no money in that company. You should sell your product for less because I want it to be cheaper, and I think that you making $17 in your miniatures is out of proportion to any form of reality, and I think that that's not fair, and you shouldn't do so. Well, first of all, the answer is don't buy the miniatures if you don't want to, but as far as these should and shouldn'ts, those are a little bit, in my opinion, egotistical to impose on someone else who is taking the risk and opposed to yourself. And the risk is high. Yes, there's reward. There's absolutely reward. But you know what the risk factor is? And these numbers are all over on the internet. So you can just do any search for what percentage of businesses fail, and you'll find different numbers. But they all seem to generally align around what I'm about to give you. I'll try to link to it below if I remember the specific one. I just used the first link that seemed to have decent statistics. But again, there's lots of these. Some of them much worse than this. I didn't search for the worst. I searched for the one that looked like it had the best backup data. But 18.4% of businesses fail within the first year. This is US based. 18.4%. That's nearly 20%. 1/5 of all businesses fail within the first year. Within 5 years, and they go year by year, I'm just not going to give you every single year by year. Within 5 years, that jumps to 50%. Because, hey, a company can run for a decent amount of time on fumes. A company can run, can exist. There's initial interest, there's initial investment, there's initial something or other. A restaurant that opens might have more clientele that first year. A board game company might have their first successful Kickstarter. So getting past that first year is still easier. Within 5 years, it's jumped to 50%. 49.7% to be exact. 50% of businesses have faltered within 5 years. That means if I start a company, if I'm running a company, there's a 50% I am out of luck and everything I've done along the way has been wasted within 5 years. Not necessarily 100% wasted. I may have made money along the way. Things may have led to opportunities, all these conversations. But the failure point of a business within 5 years is 50%. That's not small. When you jump to 10 years, it jumps to around 70%. I think it's 68 or something. I can't remember the exact number. I'll have it down below. But around 70% of businesses fail within 10 years. That's a lot. That's a lot of businesses. And granted, once you're at 10 years, I'd say you're already hitting a certain point where maybe you don't call it a failure, maybe you call it a point in a process in time. I would focus on the 5-year number as the target number in my head, just my own personal bias towards what I think is reasonable. A year is not enough time, 10 years feels like too much, but 50% of businesses fail within 5 years. That's a lot of risk. And sure, there's reward. There's absolutely reward, but the profit is not a bad word. Profit is the goal of starting a business. Profit is the potential reward you get for absorbing that 50% failure chance. As someone who's trying to start a company, what do you offer as, what's the reward for not failing? Simply continuing to struggle and survive? If you flip a coin and the options are heads, you lose $100, tails, you don't lose $100, who's flipping that coin? I'm certainly not flipping that coin. I only flip the coin when the options are actually interesting, when they're compelling in some way. Heads, I lose $100. Tails, I gain $100. Now there's an actual reason to flip the coin. Maybe it's a good decision, maybe it's not, but it's an actual reason. If 50% of businesses fail within the first 5 years, there should be a profit structure and incentive as to why someone should start that business, and we shouldn't treat profit as a bad word. I haven't even gotten to profit. Most of this conversation has been focused on the general idea of cost and expenses and revenues, but the fact that the $12 it costs someone to make 12 miniatures is not going to be the same conversation as the fact that it costs you $18 to get them. It might be a high margin product designed for those who really want the game, designed to not turn off their fan base, but to some way augment the various other expenses that have been received along the way. Most companies are not doing nearly as well as you think. Most companies, especially in the board game space, are not doing anywhere near as much as you think, and these questions are always complicated. Profit is such a fascinatingly dirty word to so many people. Again, not everyone. The nice part about these videos is inherently when I do these videos, there's a large percentage of people who are like, well, yes, Alex, of course, why are you saying all this? There's a large percentage of people that don't have a problem either way, and then there's a small percentage that are like, but business, and but they don't care, and but they made the money here, and they're actually ripping us off over here, and here's how I can show you how and why. Even as we hear day after day, the companies that are struggling, that are failing, that are losing money, that are holding your products hostage, not because they just think they can scrape more money from you, but because they're not making money. Companies are not doing as well as you think. In the board game space for sure, in life in general, in the general world we're in the post-pandemic world, this was always a conversation. It's just become more of a conversation in recent times. And there's these weird little things. I remember reading a post from somebody about the nature of being an artist and a creator. So for example, let's just use this hypothetical over here. We had a person, it's not a hypothetical, it's a real situation. I just thought it was one of those fascinating dichotomies of how we treat situations. But we had a creator of a game who, the creator of the game made his own art for the game. So he was also an artist and he made his own art. And the problem is that made the cost of the game lower because he gave up more of his time. So the cost of the game became lower and people kind of expected that. But they're like, okay, great, whatever, we'll pay for the game. But the weird part is like, but should I pay myself as the artist? Should I charge more for the game to pay myself as the artist because I'm also the artist? And also I should be paid as the creator, but that's a whole different rabbit hole we won't go down. And so it's an interesting conversation about the nature of costs and expenses because to a certain extent it's like, well, no, the profit's part of your thing. But what if he wasn't the artist for the game? What if somebody else had been the artist and that had been an expense that he had incurred, which would increase the cost of making said game? That would be a reasonable expense to incur. It's just an expense that he happened to be able to put on his own time. But why should his time not be compensated? There are all these weird conversations about the nature of trying to profit by making a product. and the way we treat profit. Now, in general, to move to Kickstarters, because I said we'll come back to it, Kickstarters, pre-orders, all these other things add a further complexity to the nature of running a business. A complexity that many of you might sit there and say, some of you, I shouldn't say many of you, some of you might sit there and say, well, they should just do it. They should make it work. It should be easy, but it's not always true. It's not how life works. The first conversation we have is the nature of siloing a product and the cost and the investment. In a traditional business structure, you might launch 10 products, and then some of those products you expect to lose money, some of those products you expect to break even, and some of those products you expect to make money. That is the nature of running a general business. You should absolutely have multiple product lines, and you know that some will do better than others, and as a whole, you hope that your revenue exceeds your cost of goods and expenses. When it comes to Kickstarter, there's this interesting expectation that people have that I think is not fair to reality, although I have what to say as well. The expectation that a Kickstarter should be funneled, that it should be siloed, that this Kickstarter should run on its own merits, this Kickstarter should run on its own merits, this Kickstarter should run on its own merits, is not the way a traditional company works. You might lose on a product and you might make on another product. That's a traditional way that most companies will do things. If you have a traditional board game company who has nothing to do with Kickstarter and they launch 10 products, some will lose, some will make, and the gains from one will cover the loss of the other. That's okay. That's how you keep a company running. And I think that's okay with Kickstarter too, but it gets more complicated. It gets more complicated because of the time difference in products. It gets more complicated because, yes, you absolutely should use the profits of one product to pay for the losses of another product. That is absolutely how a company should run. The tricky part with Kickstarter, I think the things that people are concerned with, which is reasonable, is when you're not using the profit of one product to pay for the losses of another, rather you're using the revenue of a product to pay for the losses of another. In other words, if a product, let's just use fake numbers here, if one product costs $1 million to get everything done and we only got $800,000 back, that's a $200,000 loss that we have to deal with. If another product cost $1 million and brought us 1.5, well, we have $500,000 of extra, well, we'll put $200,000 out towards the loss and we'll have $300,000 profit. The thing with Kickstarter is tricky because of the differentiated time nature of the conversation, where you have the money coming in before the product's going out, is you might have a $1 million product that only brought in $800,000, representing a $200,000 loss, and then you run a $1 million Kickstarter, and you use part of that $1 million Kickstarter to pay for the loss of the last product, while still not knowing even what the full cost, expenditures, and profit of that Kickstarter will be. I mean, in other words, using one product to pay for another, that's a good thing. That should be done. Using the revenue of a product, where you don't even know what the cost, expenses, and profit are, that's just kind of using, robbing Peter to pay Paul, shifting the responsibility of where the money and where the eventual loss and fall will happen, and that is a problem. That is a problem that companies will have to deal with. How do you silo not just the cost of goods, because it's not just the cost of goods. It's the cost of goods and the expenses. You have to silo all those things to separate products to determine how well any individual product did, and that's hard. It's not simply as easy as saying, well, just do it. It's hard. How do you extrapolate what percentage of that person's salary went towards that product and that product? What percentage of advertising, the conventions, the attribution models you use for your marketing? There's any number of expenses a company has on a regular, ongoing basis that have to be shifted towards one product or another, and the concept that you should not use one Kickstarter to pay for another is a valid concept. Everyone who says that is completely right. You should not do so, as long as we're talking about revenue, not profit. Profit's fine. The tricky part is actually managing that. Actually managing that distribution. It's hard. And if your answer might be, well, if it's hard, don't be on Kickstarter. Listen, I hear you. I don't think it's a crazy response. I think it's harder than you think. And I think it's easier to be judgmental than you think, especially if you haven't had the opportunity to run your own business at some point in time. One of the reasons I've always been very defensive of businesses in the board game space, while being defensive of consumers at the same time, the reason I often take both sides of the conversation and I try to deal with both, although I do come across as more business focused, primarily because I think most people in the space don't. I think most people in the space do not take the company side, and I think I try to because I've run businesses. I have been involved in businesses, both my own as well as management and others, and I've seen the nature of what it takes to try to just keep a company afloat. I've seen the nature of the fact that so few companies are actually rolling in it. Yes, there are companies that are rolling it. Yes, there are companies that are making tons of money off you. That absolutely exists, but most of them aren't. Most of them aren't. Most of the time, it's people trying to just make the bills work, to make things make sense. And this video isn't targeted to any one company, by the way. This video is not about CMON, it's not about Mythic, it's not about whatever company you want to insert here. It's about the general conversation around the nature of the cost of a product and just trying to have a company survive. It's the same reason why any single time I see a $50,000 Kickstarter, I worry that that company is either not surviving or that company is simply not making money. They're giving up their time, effort, and energy for the next 3 years and hopefully just paying for the price of whatever they need to expend without worrying about the degree of whether their time is compensated, whether anything else is compensated, possibly mortgaging or taking out loans to hopefully make this company exist. Businesses are hard to run. Successful businesses more so. And yes, there will be those amongst you who have run incredibly successful businesses, who have done so well, who have been fortunate enough to not have these struggles, and those amongst you might reasonably be more judgmental. Some of you, yes, some of you know. Well, I've done it, so they should do it too. That's absolutely possible. I think most people struggle. I've done a lot of contract work over the years. We haven't really talked about this, but I've done a lot of contract work over the years in other areas, and that means I've had the opportunity to get involved in the books and the finances and the marketing and the manufacturing of a variety of mid to large size companies. And something that's always astounded me is how, it doesn't matter how big the company is, they're always messier than you think on the inside. It is very easy to say you should run it better. It's very easy to say we expect more from you. Practically speaking, I've yet to really see a company, and I'm sure they exist, I think, probably, maybe, I've yet to see a company really that didn't have some large degree of mess going on inside of it. Not because they're poorly managed, but because it's just harder than you think. Life is complicated. Numbers are complicated. The math of making it all work is complicated. It doesn't simply come down to the fact that your 25-cent promo card, I mean, the price of this has changed multiple times in this conversation, your 25 cents promo card that costs you $5, there's a reason that exists. And it's not because anyone's ripping you off. That's the point of this conversation. In any case, until next time, I hope you found some value from this conversation. I hope you found, if you have any questions, by all means, post them down below. Going through a P&L sometime, a profit and loss statement, is a fascinating thing to do, and it's a worthwhile thing to do. It is very educational as far as understanding just what it takes to run a company. It's something I would encourage you to try to find the opportunity to do. If you have a friend who runs a business, if you have your own business, you've looked at your P&L, I assume. If you have a friend who runs a company, ask him or her sometime. I think it is very elucidating to really see what goes on behind closed doors in a company. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Thanks for hanging around for this board game tangential conversation. And as always, I hope you have a good one.